my brother Tom is now a big deal in Mechanicville. He owns a very prestigious, high volume funeral home. He is a former retired cop, was a Mechanicville policeman for 20 years after he got out of the Navy. He followed me into the Navy, which was kind of interesting. He thought, yeah, well, look at, my brother Anthony went in the Navy when it was his time to serve. This was back in the draft days, and, you were going to get drafted. So either waited for the draft or, you joined something. So I had been a Navy guy. So Big Tom joins the Navy. Unfortunately for my brother, he got assigned to the Seabees. These were the construction battalion of the Navy. And they called them the Seabees, Seabees, but it really was for a construction battalion. And he went in like 1964. I got out in 1964. He went in 1964. And if you think about that time in the country's history, he went in right at the beginning of the ramp up to the Vietnam conflict, the Vietnam War. And unfortunately for him, he wound up being assigned with the Seabees to Vietnam. He did a 6-month tour, if I'm correct, was in tremendous danger. He tells great stories about it. He doesn't brag about it, but he tells stories because we pressed him to tell us these stories. Driving trucks up, into Laos and, taking shelling and whatever. It's just awful. As it turns out, many years later, we all realized we could have lost him. And he did his tour there, wound up getting married, I think, on vacation to his lovely wife, Donna. They're still married now. 60 years or whatever. And unfortunately for my brother Tom, he came back, had served his time in Vietnam, and unfortunately for him, his company got sent back again to Vietnam, and I believe this time he did 7 or 8 months, and the same kind of danger at that point in the Vietnam history. It was even getting worse then. See, he was really in deep danger. But he served his country. He got out immediately at 4 years and 1 minute. Got the hell out of there. And came back home and, worked odd jobs until he found a job as a policeman. And he served honorably. He was a 20-year policeman. And during that period of time, he, to make extra money, because policemen at the point were not really making all kinds of dough, he decided that he would approach a friend that he knew, and help him drive cars in funerals. He approached the guy with the biggest business in town then, a guy, the Dunn, D-U-N-N, Dunn Funeral Home. And he wound up helping this guy by driving, in the funerals, taking loved ones of the deceased up to the, from the church up to the cemetery and back and whatever. And for some reason or another, he got interested in the business. And he started talking to Mr. Dunn. His name was Dwight. And he got talking to Dwight. And to make a long story short, he started he went to mortuary college, mortuary school, and he got his license to be a funeral director. And he started using Mr. Dunn's funeral home for a couple of, close relatives that probably weren't going to use Mr. Dunn's funeral home. And my brother did them. And to make a long story short, he wound up buying his own funeral home from a gent, a local guy who lived in Mechanicville, obviously, and called the DeVito Funeral Home. And the gent who owned DeVito Funeral Home really had been kind of close to retirement, wasn't doing many funerals, whatever. My brother made a deal with him and bought his business. Continued to work at the police department for the next, I want to say, 5 years or 4 years or 6 years, and my brother will correct me on this. But to facilitate his ability to do funerals, he worked the overnight shift. So he worked from, I guess, 12 to 8 in the morning, or 11 to 7, or 10 to 6, or whatever they did. And so he worked at the desk at the police department, answering calls and from officers and whatever, so that he could have his days to run his funeral home. You want to talk about a crazy life. He took over from my father, the 2 jobs, whatever, okay? And he started out very slowly, as all businesses do. And I can tell you, fast forward, he is now the most successful funeral director. His son, Matt, has basically taken over the business now, so that he has at least told Matt he's taken over the business. My brother's never gone away from the business and helps Matt a lot. Although a couple of times I've said to Matt, geez, Matt, it's really great that you're running the business by yourself now, huh? This is in front of my brother. And Matt looked at me with a crossed eye. Yeah, okay, great. My brother will never let up from that because that's his passion, and he does a magnificent job. And I'll use him. He'll be around when I go. So whatever. Anyway, a truly remarkable gent and a big time character. A guy who I always have said to him, Tom, you could be elected mayor tomorrow. Why don't you run for mayor? It's not a ceremonial job. I mean, people don't work full time at it, but it's a decision making job, and he is beloved in that community. My brother Tom is beloved in that community, and he makes a very valid point. He said to me, "Not a possible way to ever be mayor." And I said, well, why not? I mean, you could be elected in a heartbeat. And he said, look, you're in politics, okay? Half the people hate you, half the people love you, okay? And I'm not going to have half the people hate me and never use me in terms of any calls for the funeral business, okay? People who would call him because he's Italian and he's a well-known guy and people love him, If he was the mayor and making decisions that some of these people didn't disagree with, they'd go, no, I'm not using him. Forget him. He's out. Oh, my brother is a very, very bright guy and so has never delved into politics. That's not true. He was one of the Saratoga County's coroners for years, but that's more of a non-political job. And his background as a funeral director, he could handle that. And he did that honorably for, 10 years, 12 years, whatever, calls late at night, and he had to get in his car and go to accident scenes and, accidental death things and whatever. So he's a real pillar of the community in Mechanicsville, a big time, big shot in that town, okay, and a total character in his own right. I love my brother Tom. And I want to just say this to you. He's a fabulous communicator, okay? In fact, I left Mechanicsville in 1970, I think, okay? I went back for, to visit my parents and, trips and whatever. But when I left, I never lived there again. So I've been gone for, 50 years. 51 now ago. And in 51 years, I think my brother has called me about 6 times. No, I'm not joking. About 6 times, okay? Now, we stay in touch, thanks to me. I call him, and we have marginally good calls on the phone because he's not a phone guy. He's just one of those guys. He's not a phone guy. I have a friend of mine locally here. We talk. I can talk to this guy for 45 minutes. We love it, Great friend, whatever. We laugh. We tell stories. It's fabulous. My brother and I, with everything that we have in common, okay, literally, those phone calls are 6 minutes and very strained. He's just not a telephone guy. His wife even admits it. Anyway, but I love him nonetheless, and I stay in touch with him, and I force him to stay in touch with me. Oh, and by the way, I know you're out there. I can hear you breathing.